Hello, everyone, and welcome to the member-only Object Spotlight Hanukkah Stories. As we enter this holiday season and time of celebration, we want to offer you a deeper look into Hanukkah with some remarkable stories and objects from the museum's collection. These stories are brought to life by our Curatorial Research Assistant, Eliana Ellerton. Eliana will lead us through this journey today and is available to answer any questions after the presentation. Please remember to enter any questions you may have into the Q&A chat box for discussion. And now I would like to welcome Eliana.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for that. My name is Eliana, as Rick just very kindly introduced, and I am the Curatorial Research Assistant here at the MJH. I'm very excited to be speaking with you all today as we do a deep dive into some Hanukkah stories of objects in our permanent collection. I'm about to share my screen, so if there's any technical difficulties, please let me know and I will adjust. So let me get that up. Okay. I believe it is screen sharing. If there are any issues, please let me know. But with that, let's begin. So I want to start off with just giving a little background on our collection. If you visited our museum today, there are around 800 objects up in our exhibitions, but this actually barely scratches the surface of what's in our collection. We have more than 45,000 pieces, each with a unique history that tells the story of the Holocaust and Jewish life around the world. While a few of the objects in this talk are on display right now, most are not. Object spotlights like these offer us a chance to give these pieces the time and attention they deserve, while also providing us a launch point to learn more about the people that whom they belong to and the historical period that those individuals lived through. One of the most rewarding aspects of a collection of our size is the diversity of ideas that we can explore through the grouping of certain objects into a narrative. While our Hanukkah-related objects span centuries and continents, today I'm going to ground our focus on the years during and immediately following the Holocaust, so we can examine how shared cultural traditions and symbology create a framework for unity despite things like mass displacement and divergent individual experiences. Jewish people around the world experienced widespread destruction and displacement during the first half of the 1940s. The target of physical, cultural, and spiritual genocide, where and how Jewish people observed their holidays during those years provide insight into the circumstances and resiliency of those who celebrated. The individuals and families we speak about today are bound together not only by their shared cultural traditions, but also by this concerted effort to connect to their heritage despite their wartime displacement. Before we begin, I know that most of you are probably really familiar with the Hanukkah story, but just to, give some background for refreshment and to highlight some aspects of the story that might parallel the objects in our collection, I'm just going to give you a bit of background. Contrary to how it's portrayed in American mass culture, Hanukkah is a relatively minor Jewish holiday. Unlike Rosh Hashanah or Passover, which are mentioned in the Bible and are steeped with very ancient tradition, Hanukkah is much newer, with origins only stretching back to around 164 BCE, so in comparative comparison, very recent. The first textual mentions of Hanukkah are from the Book of Maccabees, which are a pair of texts that never entered the official canon of the Jewish Bible. In their pages, they tell the story of a band of Jewish rebels led by the Maccabee family who fought back against the Syrian Greeks occupying the land of Judea. Under the direction of Antiochus, who was the leader of their army, the Greeks sought to impose Hellenistic culture on the Jewish people and stamp out Jewish tradition. When religious rituals were practiced, they had to be done in secret, as any mention of them in the public eye would have gotten them killed or imprisoned or just would have faced severe repercussions. After 3 years of fighting, they beat back the Greek forces, they rededicated their ruined temple, and experienced miracles that have influenced our modern practice today. The most famous of these is the oil of the menorah lasting for 8 nights. The story of Hanukkah would have felt familiar to many who lived through the Holocaust. Like the Maccabees of old, Jewish people faced an overwhelming military power determined to eradicate their culture, religion, and, in the case of the Nazis, their very personhood. Like the Maccabees, those who could not flee from the Nazis had to practice their traditions in secret. These parallels continue on and would not have escaped the minds of those who were celebrating Hanukkah during the wartime years. What is so wonderful about these object spotlights is that they not only give us the opportunity to commemorate the holiday of Hanukkah by connecting us here today with the past through shared imagery and traditions, but it also gives us the chance to really dive into the stories of the people who cherished, created, and cared for these objects. And with that, let's get into the objects themselves. Before I really dive into the full stories of the objects that I'll be presenting, I just want you to turn your attention to this image that's on the left side of the screen. Hanukkah, which is the name of the piece, was created by renowned artist Arthur Szyk and is one of a set of 6 pieces from his holiday series. This brightly colored drawing features a multi-generational family celebrating the last night of Hanukkah, which we can see here by the fact that the menorah is fully stocked with candles. Every single place is filled. Throughout the image, we can also make out many icons of the holiday scattered throughout the image, indicating, like giving visual cues that the holiday of Hanukkah is going on. So in the bottom corner here, we have latkes, which is one of the most famous foods associated with the traditions. We have the children holding prayer books, where they're about to sing, probably for lighting the candles, and then the menorah itself, which I just mentioned. One thing I want to point out for some historical context about what's interesting about this piece is that it's actually quite unique in Schick's catalog as it features the likeness of his family members. This, along with the other pieces of the holiday series, are some of the only times Schick's mother, father, grandparents, and more are mentioned. He very rarely discussed his personal life in his art, and when this piece was created in 1948, he was thousands of miles away from where he grew up in Poland. This piece harkens back to his childhood and honors his family through the traditions he would have been raised in. This color illustration is featured in our exhibition Art of Freedom, The Life and Works of Arthur Szyk, which is up right now here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. If you have not had the chance yet to come by, I would highly recommend a visit to this wonderfully crafted exhibition, which features dozens of pieces that touch on Jewish life, the Holocaust, and the ideals of freedom. It'll be open until next June, so there's still a decent amount of time to visit, and I would highly recommend you do so before it closes down. It's a really amazing work. So, with that, let's fully dive into the presentation. So, for this first object right here, let's take a look back at Shanghai 1940. This photograph was taken outside of the Eastern Theater in the designated zone for Jewish refugees. It features a group of children who stand outside taking a celebratory photograph of their annual Hanukkah performance. You can see the donor of this picture right over here. I'm going to circle her right here. That is Hannelore Mansbacher, who at the time this picture was taken was 10 years old. And she seems to be holding a picture. It's hard to tell from this, but what I believe is a seesaw. Surrounding her are her classmates and teachers from the Kadori School for Jewish Refugee Children, who are all holding an eclectic group of pictures of iconography from Jewish holidays. So we can see here, this little boy is holding a picture of menorah. Next to him, she is holding a etrog and lulav. And then here in the back, we see somebody holding a photograph of a shofar. While these images call back to a diverse array of Jewish holidays, the performance took place around Hanukkah time and put special focus on the story of religious oppression and ultimate triumph. All of the children featured in this image would have had a very special connection to the story of Hanukkah, as I kind of touched upon earlier. Each experienced firsthand the rising violence in Nazi Germany and felt the oppressive laws that limited their religious observance. Mirroring the Hanukkah story once again, their escape to Shanghai may have felt nothing short of a miracle, and one that returned their personal and religious freedom. In many ways, their ability to be in Shanghai was almost miraculous. While Shanghai played a vital role in the survival of more than 20,000 Jewish refugees who were fleeing Nazi Europe, it was not a state policy that allowed them to enter China. Directly disobeying orders, Chinese diplomats risked their status as dignitaries by issuing thousands of visas to Jewish refugees. Even with the visas to escape, the danger wasn't over. Those who escaped by sea faced long voyages across treacherous waters, while others endured the harsh train journeys of Siberia. When they finally arrived in Shanghai, they found a city that was ravaged by war and poverty, and Western occupation had divided the city into Japanese, French, and British and American sectors. So a city that was completely different than what it had been 20 years earlier. Yet, with all of this, it gave Jewish refugees what mattered most, and that was a chance to survive. Before we move on to the next Hanukkah object, I want to shed some light on the little girl that we just talked about, Hannelore, and her family and how they escaped Nazi Germany. So, once again, this here in the middle is Hannelore Mansbacher, and she was born in Berlin in 1930. Her parents, Cathay and Julius Mansbacher, owned a small grocery store, but after that business was destroyed and their home was looted during Kristallnacht, they decided to move to Shanghai. This actually wasn't their first choice of where to escape to. They originally wanted to try to come to America, but the wait list to America and many other countries were far too long, and they couldn't risk waiting it out to see if they would be able to enter. Here on this left, in the picture I just pointed out, we can see them just as they were departing from Germany on the ship Triton. Smiling widely at us, seemingly thrilled at the grand adventure that lay ahead, is Hannelore. She's excited probably because, this is the first time on the ship. She was the only child aboard, so she was doted on by all the adults that were going to be there, but also likely because she had been experiencing anti-Semitism her entire life from her classmates, and this may have provided a chance to escape that. When this picture was taken in April of 1939, she was only 8 years old. Upon their arrival in June of 1939, so about 2 months later, uh, the Mansbachers were sent to Kinshou, which was one of 5 refugee camps situated in factory buildings in Shanghai in the Hongchu district. Hongchu was part of the international settlement, which contained the restricted area for stateless refugees, which was an area at that time that was pejoratively known as the Shanghai Ghetto. This is where all Jewish Holocaust refugees were forced to live from 1941 to 1945. When the Mansbachers first arrived, the living conditions were very poor, but there were at least a level of consistency to it. So they were receiving regular meals from Central Kitchen, and they were getting clothing from a central depot. As the war intensified, these conditions worsened. Food was scarce, their bombings were daily, and Jewish residents were firmly confined to that designated zone, except if they had to go to school or work. Despite the less than ideal circumstances, life went on for the Mansbacher family. Hannelore attended school at the Kadori School, where her parents actually were also janitors, and she learned English, played sports, participated in theater, and had parties with her friends. One example of such parties is what we can see here on the right side of the screen. This was taken at Hannelore's 10th birthday party, and which one that she shared with one of her friends from her class. We can see her right here in the second row sitting, and she's holding a doll. Like the photograph from the Hanukkah performances on the previous slide, the people we see here are joyously celebrating. They may have been thousands of miles from home. They were forced to live in specific areas of a city, and they were low on necessary resources. But at the end of the day, they were safe from Nazi persecution and could live their life the way they chose and practice their religion the way they chose. After the Japanese surrender, the Mansbachers remained in Shanghai for another 2 years before emigrating to the US and settling in San Francisco, where um, uh, she lived for the rest of her life. So, this will be the second image we're talking about. It's a drawing by Helga Weissova, who between the ages of 12 and 15 created over 100 illustrations depicting life in the Terezin ghetto in Czechoslovakia. Born into an assimilated Jewish family in Prague on the 10th of November 1929, Helga Weissova was deported in one of the first set of transports to Terezin right after her 12th birthday. A lover of art and writing, Helga brought her diary, crayons, watercolors, and a sketch pad with her in her luggage. Not knowing where she was going or for how long she'd be gone, Helga made sure she would have the materials to allow her to express her creativity, forgoing objects that one might consider more necessary, like extra food or extra clothing. When her family first arrived, Helga was placed in the women's barracks with her mother, but only a few months later, during the winter of 1942, she was taken away to Girls' Home L-410, which is the building where this drawing takes place. Separated from her parents, Helga covertly sent drawings to them to stay in touch. One fateful day, after sending a picture of a snowman to her father, he wrote back to her, "Draw what you see." This short statement gave Helga a mission during her time in the ghetto, and it was one that she pursued at great risk. Until she was sent with her mother to Auschwitz in 1944, Helga drew over 100 pictures documenting what life was like in the ghetto. Through the eyes of a teenage girl, we can see the entirety of Terezin life. We can see the terror, the hunger, the disease, but also the fight for normalcy and joy from these prisoners. Facing deportation in 1944, she entrusted her pictures to her uncle Joseph, who was also a prisoner in Terezin at the time. He managed to hide them successfully in a wall in the ghetto until he was liberated. After the war, Joseph gathered the drawings, returned to Prague, and found Helga, who with her mother had survived Auschwitz. He returned the drawings he kept for them, and today they stand as a visual testament to the horrors of the ghetto. Helga's story is a particularly incredible one, as out of nearly 15,000 children who were held in the Terezin ghetto, she was only one of 100 who survived. So not only do her pictures capture life in the ghetto, but the chances of her surviving to have passed them on is extremely low. So to get into the object itself, this drawing captures the clandestine celebration of a Hanukkah service in the attic of children's home L-410. This service was led by the 26-year-old Walter Freud, who we can see right here in the middle, lighting the candles and wearing a Jewish star on his chest. He was the manager of the home, so he was a pivotal part of the programs that Helga was involved with. In front of his wards and congregants, Freud lights four candles on the wind menorah, as we can see two women right here singing behind him, what is likely the prayers for Hanukkah, and they are holding a piece of paper, likely with the words for the prayers. Forbidden from observing any form of religious practice, Freud put his life at risk time and time again for his beliefs. He was known to have organized children's festivals and performances on Jewish holidays so that the kids trapped in the ghetto could feel the pride in their heritage and experience a piece of home while they were trapped. Though Freud did not survive the Holocaust, he left a huge impact on the kids he watched over through his bravery and determination, and he is still here in posterity through the people he impacted, like Helga. The celebrations organized by Freud not only brought joy to the children of the Terezin ghetto, but are representative of the myriads of ways ghetto prisoners fought for and held on to their autonomy and identity during the war. So, moving on to the next object, we have here a copy of a Hanukkah V-mail that was given to the Polish teenager Yoram Kagan by an unknown American soldier. For some background, throughout the war, V-mails were the primary form of correspondence used by American soldiers abroad to securely communicate with their loved ones back home. Many American Jews were drafted into the war effort, and this V-mail is a manifestation of one of these soldiers' efforts to celebrate his heritage while thousands of miles from home. While the story of Jewish GIs fighting in the war are fascinating and layered, what stands out to me in this V-mail is the location from which it was sent. As you can see right here under the menorah, circle it, it says that it's from Persia. And then right under it, we have a sigil with a sword and a star, which are two symbols that are woven throughout Persian history. So, saying this, Yoram, the donor of this V-mail, was born and raised in Poland. So, how did he end up with this V-mail in 1943 in Iran? It really goes back to the fact that World War II is a global story, but we don't often talk about places like the Middle East and the Arabian Peninsula while we discuss the Holocaust and the battles during World War II. The whole region acted as a battle stage for the Allied and Axis powers as they pushed and pulled for control of the whole region. Although Iran initially sought to remain neutral during the war, the Soviet Union and Great Britain wanted Iran to enter the war in alignment with the Allied powers to prevent the Germans from invading further into the Caucasus through their land. Using the power they already held as joint occupiers of Iran, which was a arrangement that had existed before the onset of the war, the Soviet Union and Great Britain demanded that the King of Iran abdicate his throne in favor of his son Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who at the time was known to be very pro-British. The king abdicated his throne 5 days later and went into exile in South Africa. Reza Pahlavi signed a treaty with the Allies in 1942, and in exchange for declaring war on Germany, Iran would receive economic support and the promise of war, or the promise of withdrawal from their land after the war ended. So, because of this deal, Iran became a major throughway for Allied supplies and soldiers, especially for the USSR. So, with this background, let's go on about how the 17-year-old Polish Jewish Yoram obtained this Hanukkah V-mail in Iran in 1943, which before having done research on this, I was very confused how he ended up in Persia at the time. So Yoram was born in Poland in 1926, but at the age of 14, the Soviets deported him with his parents to a gulag in the northern parts of Russia, where they remained for almost a year. After the Germans attacked the USSR in 1941, the Soviets decided to release many of their Polish prisoners and actually allowed them to form a Polish army in the USSR. This group was similar to other Polish battalions that were fighting the Nazis in Western Europe, specifically in places like England, which had been organized by the Polish government in exile. So this was only one battalion in a larger scale of many that were fighting for Poland during the war. Yoram's father decided that he wanted to become one of the soldiers that entered this Polish army. In the spring of 1942, Yoram's father was evacuated to a base in Iran with other Polish soldiers, and as the dependents of a Polish army officer, Yoram and his mother followed them. For over a year, they spent time in a Polish refugee camp in Tehran where the story takes place, or near where the story takes place. While they were there, Yoram attended Hanukkah services at the American Air Base near the Iraqi border, where he received this email. This unconventional service was held in a tent that, interestingly enough, was on occasion used as a church. Use what you have at the time. And and also something is that in his recollections, he describes his entire experience as, quote, exotic. But to me, what's interesting is that likely the mechanics of this whole situation were probably quite familiar and more familiar than much of what was going on in this time. The traditions practiced by Yoram and his family in Eastern Poland and then in the USSR were echoed in that tent in Iran as he was surrounded by American soldiers. Millennia-old traditions bound together these Jewish celebrants and provided them all a sense of home, even as they were so far away from their families and everything that they knew. Like many Soviet prisoners, Yoram used that allies' presence in the Middle East as a chance to continue journeying to what at the time was known as Palestine. He spent much of the rest of the war there, but as it continued, he followed in his father's footsteps and ended up joining the British Army in their Polish division, where he fought in Egypt and Italy, tying the story almost in a neat bow. Uh, so, on to our next object. We're going to take a look at this booklet of Jewish pictures, which features a Hanukkah scene. Before we fully dive into the content, I want to tell you a little bit more about our donor, Ruth Claire Folder, and her family. Ruth was born on December 30th, 1930, in Breslau, Germany, to Gustav and Ida Folder, who we can see here on the left-hand side, with Ruth right here in the middle. And she was only 6 years old in this picture. On the right, we have a photograph of Ruth again, but this time with her older brother Fritz, who's right here in the middle, and then her younger sister Ava, who's right over here. For reasons we don't know, Ruth was the only one of her family members that was placed on the Kindertransports, even though her younger sister and older brother both qualified as well. At just 8 years old, Ruth escaped Germany to England on one of the last Kindertransports from Berlin in July of 1939. This journey ultimately saved her life, as her mother, father, and siblings, who we all see right here, they all died in Auschwitz. So going on the Kindertransports was the reason she was able to survive through the war. When she arrived, she was assigned to live with the Adels family in Manchester. Immediately upon her arrival, a number of issues appeared with this placement. The Adels practiced Reform Judaism, which, well, was a form of Judaism was radically different than what Ruth had grown up with, as she described herself as being ultra-Orthodox. In addition, only Mr. Adel remained in the house. This was not something that was known by the placement committee that put her there. They had assumed that his wife and daughter were still there, but they had actually fled to Bermuda with the escalating violence in Europe. So it was just Mr. Adel and Ruth in the house. A couple months after she arrived, Ruth was accused of stealing by Mr. Adel and was promptly kicked out. After this, Ruth was placed with Phoebe and Florence Cook, who were a mother and daughter with whom she stayed until 1944. In 1944, she was uprooted yet again, this time because the Cooks were a Christian family. An English Jewish refugee committee decided that she needed to be raised in a Jewish environment, so they placed her in a Jewish-run hostel in Blackpool, England. There, her Jewish education was renewed, and she attended Cheder, which are Jewish classes. She went to synagogue, and her Hebrew education for the language was renewed as well. To go back to the booklet, this booklet we have here was given to her at that Blackpool hostel in 1944 as a part of her Jewish education. It was donated to the hostel by the Swiss agency, and I'm going to apologize for my pronunciation in advance, the Verband Schweizerische Jüdische Versorgung, which translates roughly to the Association of Jewish Swiss Welfare Services, which was an aid agency based in Switzerland, which offered support to Jewish refugees fleeing from Nazi Germany. Over the course of the war, they helped over 23,000 Jewish refugees, including, as we can see here, the children from the Kindertransport who were being cared for in England. The text we see here on the cover, right over here, translates to Jewish pictures in three of the national languages of Switzerland. So on the left, we have German, in the middle, we have French, and on the right, we have Italian. Uh, on its green cover, we have a woodcut of two children looking at a book, perhaps learning, indicating the purpose of this booklet, which was to educate the Jewish children. Within its pages, there were 8 inserts, each which featured a painting by Moritz Daniel Oppenheim, who was a prolific German artist who is considered to be the first Jewish painter of the modern era. Each picture handles a snapshot of Jewish life. The first of these is the evening Sabbath, the second is the Seder, third is Shavuot, the fourth was Sukkot, the fifth was Yom Kippur, the sixth, which we have featured here, is Hanukkah, the seventh is titled The End of the Sabbath, which is also subtitled as Havdalah, and the last was called Mapah, which was the child's first encounter with the Torah. What we see here in the middle, this is the original image on the left, and this is a blown up picture so we can get more detail. So what we can see here is a multi-generational, well-off German, not German, what could be German, but a well-off European Jewish family who were celebrating the holiday together. On the very left side of here on the image, we see a father and a son lighting the menorah together, an act of passing on the tradition. While on the floor, right over here, we see a group of children very joyfully playing the dreidel, probably making memories for themselves and instating their own, associations with the holiday and the joy that comes with it. Like the holiday of Hanukkah, this print is infused with soft light and the feeling of celebration, which are two of the central characteristics we associate with its observance. These scenes would have been very familiar and what I hope is comforting to Ruth, who was hundreds of miles away from her family when she received this book. Having at that point been separated from her family for over 5 years, the Jewish education she received at the hostel and the holidays she celebrated hopefully alleviated some of the homesickness she must have felt in this displacement. Next, I'm going to talk to you about this fifth edition of the newspaper Unser Stimme, which translates to Our Voice. And it is particularly interesting because it was one of the most prominent newspapers that came out of the displaced persons camp, and it was the first to circulate from the British occupied zone. It was a very famous newspaper in the area. After the war, hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees streamed into Germany from concentration camps around Europe. Once they had physically recuperated, these refugees developed a robust political, social, and cultural scene in the TP camps. Unser Stimme manifested from this cultural boom. It was produced by survivors in the Bergen-Belsen TP camp and quickly became one of the most widely read periodicals in the network of displaced person camps. Its popularity stemmed from a multitude of factors, some of which included the fact that it had articles in Yiddish and English, that it was politically unaffiliated, and that the Bergen-Belsen TP camp was the center of all displaced person camp political and social life in the British zone of occupation. So everything that was coming out of it was also being distributed to other camps that were in the British occupied zone. Publishing the newspaper at the beginning was almost impossible. It was very difficult to get paper or a printing press in post-war Germany, and the first issue of the newspaper, which appeared only 2 months after the end of the war in July 1945, was handwritten. This issue we have here, the fifth edition, was actually the first that was typewritten. It has a very special story in relation to us here in New York, actually, because the reason they were able to start typewriting and duplicating these editions were through the kindness and generosity of the Jewish Authors Guild of New York, which donated a printing press to the Bergen-Belsen TP camp. So these editions were only able to spread the way they do because of the Jewish Authors Guild in New York, which I think is really special as we're presenting this here in New York. Over the next 2 years, 24 editions of the paper were crafted with articles that touched on difficult subject matter such as refugee problems and struggles to immigrate, but it also made sure to include articles that featured art, literature, and holiday celebrations. This edition of Unser Stimme highlights one of these reflections on joy and religious observance by featuring a menorah for Hanukkah on its front cover. Contained in its pages are articles about the holiday along with illustrations and poems. We received this copy of Unser Stimme in 1991 from Paula Funk, who donated 15 other editions of this paper as well. During the Holocaust, Paula was imprisoned in Bergen-Belsen and remained in its TP camp after liberation. Like many other residents, Paula was very involved in the bustling community that was formed in the camp. She met her husband and had her first child there, and she collected books, poetry, newspapers that were created by Holocaust survivors for Holocaust survivors, which she kept throughout her life, even after she left the camp. I want to highlight this Hanukkah edition of the newspaper as it gives us an opportunity to learn about this incredibly important piece of DP camp history. In its pages, we get an intimate look at the strength of Jewish survivors and their efforts to foster creativity, community, and normalcy after the war. We see through the menorah on the cover that religious and cultural Jewish life thrived after the war, even in Bergen-Belsen, which was only months prior used as an extermination camp. As its name implies, everyone in the DP camp was in a state of displacement. Many, like Pola, stayed in the DP camp for years after liberation, struggling to figure out if they should return to the places that they grew up in, or should start anew in a place that didn't have as many ghosts of the Holocaust, where the trauma wasn't as fresh. Many, like Pola and my own family, decided that they ultimately wanted to move abroad and escape the horrors of the Holocaust. But in that interim period where they were still deciding, life, culture continued. Newspapers like Unser Stein are manifestations of this willpower of displaced people and is a representation of their efforts to try and make the best of their circumstances and hold on to traditions that they held dear, which, from this cover, included the holiday of Hanukkah and its celebrations. And onto our last object of today, we're going to be talking about two separate objects that are in relation to each other as they are involved in the same story. Both of them relate to the story of an American Army chaplain, who we see here on the left, who I will speak about in a minute, and how he helped rebuild a Jewish community after the war. On December 23rd, 1946, which was the fifth night of Hanukkah, the 300 remaining Jews of Weissbaden, Germany, came together to dedicate a synagogue for their community. This was an incredibly special evening for all intendants, as it concluded a passionate effort to rebuild and replace their former house of worship, which had been destroyed during Kristallnacht. It wasn't just survivors who returned and joined this dedication, but actually many army soldiers as well, Jewish and non-Jewish. There was an army battalion that was stationed in Weissbaden, and many of them helped rebuild the synagogue, both financially and through like physical efforts of putting it together. So they were very involved in the creation of the synagogue. Chaplain William Dalen, who we see here on the left, right here. Oh, sorry about that. Here we go. Who we see here on the left was particularly important to the story, as he was the only Jewish chaplain in the area. He supervised the rebuilding of the Weissbaden synagogue, and in that interim where they didn't have a spiritual leader, he acted as such for the community. For some background, William Z. Dallin was born on June 15th, 1906, in Chevel, Lithuania. Dallin moved to the United States in 1926 to pursue higher education in New York City, and while he was here, he received smicha to become a rabbi, and he also received a law degree. With his higher education, he ultimately decided that what meant most to him was continuing Jewish education for youths, and he ended up teaching at a yeshiva in Borough Park for many years. In 1944, Rabbi Dalen enlisted in the military as a chaplain, where he served all over the world. Some of them were quite close by, relatively. Like for an example, is he served in Phoenix, Arizona, but then others he went halfway across the globe, and he stayed stationed for a period in Calcutta, India. Eventually, he was stationed in Weissbaden, where our Hanukkah story takes place. In this photograph, we can see him officiating the rededication. Dalen stands strong at the podium in his army uniform and talit, showing his dual role as military official and religious leader. This picture catches him mid-prayer as he lights the candles on the menorah, likely recounting the blessing that leads into Hanerot Halalu, which translates to "These candles we kindled." As I spoke about earlier, the story of Hanukkah has many parallels to lived experiences of survivors in the Holocaust. The choice to dedicate the synagogue on Hanukkah was very likely a callback on these somewhat shared struggles and triumphs, trying to fit the community's own experiences during the war. Um, like the Greeks and the Maccabees, the community of Weissbaden were persecuted for their religion, and they were banned from partaking in religious activities. Their place of worship was destroyed, their relics were burned, and many of their families were ripped away from them. This story would have resonated very strongly with the Jews of Weissbaden, who themselves had their synagogues, Torah, and more taken away during Kristallnacht. But like the Maccabees of old, these 300 Jews survived and lived to celebrate again, now in their new synagogue. The menorah here to the right of your screen, which I'll circle right here, was also dedicated the same night that this picture was taken, except it's not the menorah in the photograph, perhaps as some of you can recognize for very particular reasons. The menorah here to the right has actually 5 branches instead of 8, with the shamash in the middle, leaving it to be unusable specifically for the tradition of lighting the candles per night. Uh, so, what is the meaning behind these 5 branches, and why was it chosen to be dedicated on the same night as the synagogue opening? For some, the 5 branches of the menorah are used during mourning periods. Representing the five levels of the neshama, or the soul, as described in the Kabbalah, mourners will light five candles to honor the memory, representing each layer of that soul. As a community that was ravaged by the Holocaust, the Jews of Wiesbaden would have been very familiar with the traditions around mourning and may have found it meaningful to have this menorah amongst the objects included in the dedication of the new synagogue. Unlike our previous objects, this is actually a story of homecoming and not displacement. Only a year after liberation, this was the first time that the Jews of Wiesbaden were able to fully celebrate their community and heritage after the traumas of the Holocaust. No more covert prayers in concentration camps or candlelighting as refugees in foreign lands. The Jews of Wiesbaden were able to gather once again with their family and friends in the city that they had so long called home. And with that, that is my last object that I'll be speaking on today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and you learned something new about our collection and the history of the Holocaust. And if you have any questions, I'm very happy to answer them. And just want to thank you again for joining us today.
Great. Thank you, Eliana, for such a wonderful presentation. Now I will ask you some questions if any of the viewers have any. I don't see any at the moment in the Q&A box or in the chat, so I can give you all a minute, but please feel free to ask anything you'd like. Well, Eliana, I think you did such a great job that there aren't any questions. Oh, wait, actually one came in from
Mhm,
Jill. Um, how did you select these objects for this presentation?
mhm. Um, so my initial thought when I was going over my first object checklist was I actually wanted to find one year to present on. I wanted to see if we had any objects that were differentiated by space, but not necessarily by time. So we could see how Hanukkah was represented through different Holocaust experiences throughout the world. But unfortunately, we didn't have enough objects to be able to fully give you a well-rounded presentation. I would say most of these objects are from 1943, so the middle of the war. Um, but because of that, I decided to expand our story a little bit. Though every year of the Holocaust was different, every year of the war was different, there are universalizing experiences that happened over the course of that 5 years that are just not applicable to basically any other time in history. So, using that theme of being able to talk about how mass displacement, how the horrors of the Holocaust created a very specific way of celebrating Hanukkah and a very specific representation of the people who decided to celebrate. I expanded that from just 1943 or 1944 to being from 1940 to 1946. The last two objects were obviously from after the war, but they're so closely intertwined with the story of the Holocaust and the communities that survived the Holocaust that they added their own spin to it, an extra layer. So that's kind of how I came to that conclusion because we have so many objects and you could tell endless stories through endless narratives. But I wanted to be able to show the resilience of the people who made these objects, who cared for these objects, who donated these objects, and what Hanukkah was like during the Holocaust and how that can relate back to the themes in the Hanukkah story and perhaps how that gave them strength. So that was kind of my thought process while I was creating it.
What a great answer. Thank you. Um, I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I think we will conclude. So thank you all for attending today's member program. This program was recorded and we will be sharing it in Monday's member newsletter. So we look forward to seeing you all at the next one or at the museum soon. Thank you. Bye bye.